are falling at McDonald's, the fast food restaurant most of us grew up with. Even rehabbing and adding latte machines hasn't brought in that much new business.
McDonald's Australia is facing a crisis, and the fast food giant is terrified. Millions of customers are walking away, and it is not just about cold fries. From menu prices to massive political ads that are literally tanking their global profits, Australians are finally fighting back with their wallets. But how did a beloved national staple turn into public enemy number one overnight? We are going to work through all 12, from the complaints customers made loudest to the change that actually carries consequences. Number 12, the cashless backlash. Start with the part customers actually notice themselves. McDonald's outlets in Melbourne began posting signs saying card payments only between midnight and 6 in the morning. The reaction was immediate and it was loud, with customers publicly threatening to take their business elsewhere. McDonald's pointed to the safety and well-being of employees and customers, which is a legitimate reason. Overnight staff handling cash in an empty restaurant is a genuine risk, and nobody sensible disputes that. Here is why it still landed badly. Cash is what you use when your card is declined, when your bank has an outage, or when you are budgeting to the dollar. Cashless hours quietly exclude the people with the least financial slack, at the hours when the cheapest food is being sold. Australia has been arguing about cash acceptance for years, and this drops straight into that argument. The company gained a safety improvement and a cost saving in the same decision. That combination is a theme you will see repeatedly in this video. It also arrived at a moment when Australians were already arguing about the right to pay in cash. Regulators and politicians have been circling mandatory cash acceptance for essential purchases for some time. Whether a burger at 3 in the morning counts as essential is a genuine question, and reasonable people disagree. What is not in dispute is that the decision removed an option from customers who had no say in it. Franchisees also carry the safety obligation directly, since they employ the overnight staff. A decision that protects a 17-year-old working a night window is not automatically a cynical one. It simply happens to save money as well, and both facts belong in the same sentence. Just ahead, the number customers started shouting about long before any court case began. Number 11. $25 for 2 meals. Customers have been voicing strong frustration over price increases, with some saying they now pay $25 for 2 meals. That is the figure being repeated by ordinary customers, not by a campaign group. Globally, the average price of McDonald's items has risen roughly 40% since 2019. The company says that increase is in line with its own rising costs, and input costs genuinely did rise sharply. Both of those statements can be true at once, and mostly they are. What matters for you is what the brand promised versus what the receipt says. McDonald's built its entire identity on being the cheap option that everyone could afford. A family of 4 crossing $50 for a routine dinner is not that brand anymore. Value perception has dimmed among cash-conscious customers, which is corporate language for people noticing. McDonald's has responded with value menus and app deals in multiple markets. An app deal is not a low price. It is a low price with a condition and a data requirement attached. There is one more wrinkle worth knowing about how these prices are set in practice. Franchisees pay rent and service fees to head office, frequently calculated as a percentage of sales. That structure means the corporate parent earns from the top line regardless of what the franchisee's margin looks like. A price rise that helps a struggling franchisee survive also increases the amount flowing upward. There is a sharper way to test whether a price rise is about costs or about margin. Costs rising means margins hold steady while prices climb, and that shows up in published accounts. Margins expanding while prices climb means something else entirely, and shareholders are told about it either way. If you want to see how this actually lands when judgment comes, hit subscribe, because these cases take months and almost nobody covers the outcome once the headlines move on. Coming up, the structure that lets the head office point somewhere else whenever prices come up. Number 10, 95% franchised. Around 95% of McDonald's locations are independently owned franchises. That single fact shapes every argument in this video. When customers complain about prices, McDonald's points out that franchisees set their own prices. That is accurate. It is also extremely convenient. In the United States, the gap became embarrassing enough that head office intervened directly. A Big Mac cost $6.99 in Seattle and $5.19 in Boise in the same month. From January of 2026, McDonald's introduced franchising standards assessing how franchisee prices deliver value. Franchisees pushed back with a 15-item Bill of Rights, arguing they were being forced below sustainable pricing. Watch what just happened there. because it matters enormously for the rest of this list. When head office wants to control pricing, it can, and it does. When head office is asked about responsibility for what happens inside those restaurants, the answer becomes that franchisees are independent operators. The franchise model is genuinely a legitimate way to run a business, and thousands of Australians own these restaurants. Many of them are small operators carrying real risk, real debt, and real staffing headaches. Criticising the structure is not the same as attacking the person running your local store. The question in these cases is where legal responsibility sits when the system produces the same outcome repeatedly. Australia has its own version of this pricing tension, and the same franchise structure sits underneath it. Head office sets the brand, the menu, the marketing, and the standards. The individual operator sets the number on the board. That split is genuine, and it is also the most useful shield in corporate retail. Straight ahead, the court judgment that tested exactly that argument. Number 9, the Tantex judgment. In August of 2020, the federal court delivered a judgment involving a McDonald's franchisee called Tantex Holdings. The court found the franchisee had misrepresented workers' break entitlements to its own employees. Staff were told they got a paid 10-minute break only on shifts of more than 4 hours. The actual entitlement was shifts of 4 hours or more, which is a meaningfully different thing. That word "more" was doing an enormous amount of work. A 4-hour shift is the standard shift for a school student working after class. Telling that student they need to exceed 4 hours to earn a break removes the break from precisely the workers most likely to have one. The court also found the franchisee had breached the agreement by failing to provide those paid breaks. That judgment became the foundation everything since has been built on. Once a court has established what the entitlement actually is, the question stops being about interpretation. It becomes a question about how many times it happened and who is responsible for it. That distinction between more than 4 hours and 4 hours or more sounds pedantic until you see the rosters. 4-hour shifts are the backbone of fast food scheduling precisely because they suit school and university timetables. Defining the entitlement just above the most common shift length removes it from most of the workforce. Whether that was deliberate or careless is exactly what these proceedings exist to determine. The case was brought by the Retail and Fast Food Workers Union against the franchisee directly. A single restaurant operator taken to the federal court over 10 minutes. That is how long it took to establish a point most people would assume was never in doubt. Just around the corner, the part of that ruling that surprised almost everybody. Number 8, water and the toilet. The Tantex judgment made something else clear, and it is genuinely startling when you read it. McDonald's workers are entitled to drink water and use the toilet outside of their scheduled breaks. Sit with the fact that a court had to state that, not as an opinion, not as guidance, as a finding necessary to resolve a dispute about what workers were allowed to do. That single line tells you more about conditions in parts of this industry than any statistic could. These are frequently teenagers in their first job, on a busy shift, unsure whether they are permitted to ask. Most will never ask, because asking requires confidence that a 16-year-old on their third shift does not have. That is the underlying dynamic across every entry in this video. The entitlements were always written down and legally binding. The question was whether anybody in the restaurant knew about them or felt able to insist. Anybody who has worked a closing shift knows the version of this that never reaches a court. You skip the break because the queue is out the door and there is nobody to cover the register. Nobody instructed you to skip it. The staffing level made the decision on everybody's behalf. If you worked a job like this as a teenager and never once got a break, you were owed. Tell us in the comments, because those stories land harder than anything a court transcript can convey. It also raises an obvious question about what a 10-minute break is actually for. It exists so somebody standing at a fryer for 4 hours can sit down, drink something, and stop concentrating. Removing it is not a minor administrative issue. It changes what the shift physically does to a person. It is a low bar, and the fact that it needed a judgment at all is the point worth carrying forward. Number 7, what the break rule actually says. Let us be precise, because precision is the entire case. Under the relevant agreement and the Fast Food Industry Award, a worker gets a paid 10-minute break on a shift of 4 hours or more. Work 9 hours or more, and you get 2 paid 10-minute breaks. Paid means paid. It is working time, and the 10 minutes is not deducted from your wages. The obligation sits with the employer to provide it, not with the worker to request it. That last point is where the whole dispute lives. A break you have to ask for during a rush, from a manager under pressure is a break most young workers will simply not take. The allegation in these proceedings is that workers continued working during periods when they were entitled to paid breaks. The claims run under Section 50 of the Fair Work Act for failure to comply with the enterprise agreement. They also run under Section 45 for failure to comply with the modern award. The applicants further allege franchisor responsibility under Section 558B of the Fair Work Act. That last section is the one McDonald's Australia will be watching most closely. Section 558B is relatively recent law introduced after a wave of franchise underpayment scandals in Australia. It exists specifically because Parliament decided franchisors were escaping accountability for conditions inside their networks. If it applies here, it applies well beyond McDonald's and well beyond fast food. Every franchise business in the country has lawyers reading these judgments closely. It is also why the union framed the claim around franchisor accountability rather than individual restaurants. Suing one operator fixes one restaurant. Establishing franchisor responsibility changes the entire network at once. Coming up, the scale of the group these test cases actually cover. Number 6, 350,000 workers. The SDA describes the proceedings as test cases drawn from a group of more than 300,000 affected workers. More recent statements put the figure above 350,000. Think about what a number that size means in a country of Australia's population. McDonald's has been a first job for an enormous share of the Australian workforce for decades. If the allegations are made out, the affected group includes people now in their 40s who worked a counter in their teens. The trial ran for 9 weeks with more than 100 witnesses scheduled to give evidence. Workers from McDonald's, Collinswood and Munopara in South Australia took the stand. Those are 2 ordinary suburban restaurants, and the case turns on what happened inside them. Test cases work by establishing the principle first and applying it to the wider group afterwards. That is why 2 South Australian restaurants can determine an outcome for hundreds of thousands of people. It is also why both sides are fighting it this hard. The union has also pursued supported bargaining arrangements covering McDonald's franchisees. The Fair Work Commission authorised multi-enterprise bargaining covering 18 South Australian franchisees, which became subject to judicial review. The SDA then sought to extend those arrangements to franchisees nationwide. Employer groups argued the decision could reshape bargaining across fast food, hospitality and retail entirely. 9 weeks is also an extraordinarily long trial by Australian standards. Most employment matters resolve in days. A 9-week hearing with 100 witnesses signals both sides consider this existential. Straight ahead, the single witness whose evidence puts the whole thing in perspective. Number 5, 827 breaks. One witness alleges he was denied 827 paid 10-minute rest breaks. Later reporting from the union puts the figure at more than 850. Do the arithmetic, because the arithmetic is the story. 827 breaks at 10 minutes each is 8,270 minutes. That is 137 hours of unpaid work. Expressed the way the union expressed it, that is over 18 full working days. 18 days of somebody's life, worked and not paid, 10 minutes at a time. Nobody notices 10 minutes. That is precisely why the allegation matters. No single instance would ever be worth complaining about, let alone escalating. It only becomes visible when somebody counts every single one across years of shifts. That is what a class action is actually for. And it is why individual complaints never fix this. There is a reason young workers rarely raise this at the time, and it is not ignorance. A casual shift worker with no guaranteed hours knows exactly how easily a roster can quietly shrink. You do not need to be threatened to understand the incentive. You only need to want next week's shifts. That imbalance is why individual enforcement of workplace rights almost never works in this industry. If you can remember roughly how many shifts you worked as a teenager, it is worth doing that same sum for yourself. And we would love to see the number you land on in the comments, because seeing them side by side is what makes the scale of this land. It is also worth noting how the figure was reconstructed in the first place. Rosters, timesheets, and payroll records exist for every one of those shifts going back years. The evidence in a case like this is not memory. It is documentation the employer created itself. Just ahead, what McDonald's says in response, because a fair video includes it properly. Number 4, what McDonald's says. McDonald's has historically denied these allegations. and that denial deserves to be stated clearly. The company's position is that it always works with its franchisees to comply with the Fast Food Industry Award. That is a genuine legal position, and it is not a dismissal of the claims out of hand. There are two separate questions in this case, and it is worth keeping them apart. The first is whether breaks were denied in individual restaurants. The second is whether McDonald's Australia, as franchisor, is legally responsible for what its franchisees did. A company can lose the first argument and still win the second one. McDonald's Australia does not directly employ most of the workers in these claims. Those workers are employed by independent franchisees running their own businesses under license. The union's argument is that McDonald's is an accessory to the breaches and that franchisor responsibility applies. None of this is settled, and nothing in this video should be read as a finding of fact. The court will decide, and it has not decided yet. It is also worth saying that McDonald's Australia employs and trains an enormous number of Australians. For a great many people, it was a genuinely good first job with decent training and flexible hours. Both things can be true. A company can be a reasonable employer overall and still face serious allegations about a specific practice. Number 3, the managers are suing too, Rose. The break case is not the only action McDonald's Australia is defending. A separate SDA class action covers shift supervisors, department managers, assistant restaurant managers, and restaurant managers. The allegation is that they were required to work unpaid before and after their rostered shifts. The class covers anyone in those roles at any McDonald's store in Australia between December of 2017 and April of 2024. That is more than 6 years of managers across hundreds of restaurants. Unpaid work before and after a shift has a name in the industry, and everybody in hospitality knows it. You arrive early to set up. You stay late to cash up and clean down. The clock does not reflect either. For a salaried manager, that time simply evaporates. The action asks the court to order back pay and to impose penalties on McDonald's Australia and its operators. Shine Lawyers, supported by RAFFUIU, has also filed a separate class action on the break issue. Multiple firms, multiple unions, multiple actions all pointed at the same set of practices. Managers occupy an awkward position in every one of these disputes. They are the people expected to enforce break rules on the floor, while frequently receiving none themselves. Many of the managers now suing were the same people telling crew there was no time for a break. That is not a defense of anybody. It is a description of how pressure travels downward through an operating model. Gordon Legal and the SDA have now built a repeatable template for these claims. Identify a break entitlement in an award, gather worker accounts at scale, and pursue the franchisor as well as the operator. That template is why 3 brands are defending near identical claims within roughly 12 months. RAF Wu and the SDA have historically taken different approaches to this industry, and they are not natural allies. Both are now pursuing the same practice through the courts at the same time. When 2 competing unions land on an identical target, that usually says something about the strength of the underlying claim. Coming up, the settlement that changed the odds on all of it. Number 2, KFC paid $28.8 million. In February of 2026, KFC settled its own rest breaks class action. The company agreed to a $28.8 million payment to employees over 10-minute paid breaks. That case was brought by the SDA and Gordon Legal, the same combination pursuing other operators. A settlement is not an admission of liability, and that distinction is legally important. What a settlement of that size does tell you is how seriously the defendant assessed its risk. Nobody pays $28.8 million over an issue they expect to win comfortably. The precedent immediately changed the landscape for everybody else in the sector. In December of 2025, Grilled joined McDonald's in defending class action litigation over the same allegation. That claim covers Grilled employees between December of 2019 and December of 2025. 3 major fast food brands. The same 10-minute break. The same courts. Within roughly a year. This has stopped being a dispute about one company and become a reckoning for an entire industry. If you have ever worked fast food in Australia and want to say something about how breaks actually worked on your shifts, the comments are the right place, because these cases were built out of exactly those ordinary accounts. $28.8 million also puts a price on a 10-minute break for the first time. Every operator in the country can now do that arithmetic against their own headcount and their own history. For a business the size of McDonald's Australia, that calculation is considerably larger. Settlements also typically avoid any finding of fact, which is precisely why companies prefer them. The workers get paid, and the legal question stays permanently unanswered. That suits everybody except the next group of workers who need the precedent. Number 1. Wage theft is now a crime. On the 1st of January 2025, wage theft laws commenced under the Fair Work Act. It is now a criminal offence for an employer to intentionally engage in conduct resulting in underpayment of wages or denial of entitlements. Read the word intentionally carefully, because it is the hinge of the entire provision. This is not about payroll errors or genuine mistakes, and the law is explicit about that. It targets deliberate conduct, and deliberate conduct now carries consequences that did not exist before. Here are the penalties, and they are the reason this sits at number 1. Companies can face fines of up to $8.25 million, or 3 times the underpayment amount, whichever is greater. Individuals can face up to 10 years imprisonment. Individuals can also face fines of up to $1.65 million, or 3 times the underpayment, whichever is greater. 10 years imprisonment for a person, not a fine for a company. That changes the calculation inside every boardroom and every franchise office in the country. For decades, the worst realistic outcome of underpaying staff was being made to pay it back later, with a penalty attached. Back pay is not a deterrent. It is a delay with interest, and everybody in the system understood that. A criminal offence with a custodial sentence is a completely different proposition. These laws are not retrospective, so they do not apply to the historical conduct alleged in the current cases. What they do is change everything that happens from here. That is why this is the real story, and why it is bigger than any boycott. A boycott lasts a week and the news cycle moves on. A criminal statute sits there permanently, applying to every employer in Australia, forever. There is one more consequence worth understanding about criminal liability. Directors and senior managers cannot insure their way out of a prison sentence the way a company insures against a fine. That personal exposure is what actually changes behavior inside an organization. Compliance stops being a line item and becomes something individuals have a direct reason to care about. Wage theft laws also arrived after years of scandals across Australian hospitality, retail, and franchising. Parliament did not write them about McDonald's. It wrote them about a pattern that had become impossible to ignore. 12 entries, and almost none of it was decided by customers. The cashless signs and the price complaints made the news and changed very little. What actually moved was 350,000 workers, 2 unions, several law firms, and 1 courtroom in South Australia. Michael Donovan of the SDA put it plainly, saying it should not take a huge federal court case for McDonald's to just do the right thing. Josh Peake made the point that lands hardest, that young workers in their first jobs should be able to rely on a massive company to do the right thing. If you are working in fast food right now, the practical takeaway is simple enough. A paid 10-minute break on a shift of 4 hours or more is an entitlement, not a favour. You're also entitled to drink water and use the toilet outside that break, which a court has already confirmed. Knowing that is worth more than any boycott because it applies on your next shift rather than in a headline. The fight was never about creating new rights. It was about enforcing rights that were already written down. Thanks for watching. If you worked at Macca's as a teenager, go and think about whether you ever actually got that 10-minute break, and tell us in the comments what you remember. Boycotts get attention. Court judgments and criminal statutes get outcomes. That is the difference this video is really about. Want to see what happened when KFC settled and what it means for everyone else? Click on the video on the left. See you there.